welcome to the Building Blocks of Business, a podcast show where we dive in and explore various aspects of the business world. This show is brought to you by NITK in association with NITK Toastmasters Club. I'm your host, Suprita Harishankar, third year BTech student in the ECE department. Today, you're listening to the first episode of Season 1, the ABCs of Applying to a B School. In today's conversation, I get to sit with our guest, Achuth Arun, an NITK alumnus from the batch of 2017. Achuth is an Indian School of Business graduate, class of 2020, who was previously working as an analytics consultant with Wells Fargo. He was involved in leveraging analytics and machine learning to drive automation and process improvement across multiple divisions. He has worked in R and Python, building ML solutions and designing user interfaces in Shiny to make solutions user accessible. Achuth is an avid motorcycle tourer, having covered 55 plus destinations in South India and having trekked across the Parvati range of the Himalayas via the Sarpas trek. Congratulations on graduating, Achuth.
Thanks, Suprita, and also thank you for having me on the show. This is an honor to be talking back as an alum to the different batches across NITK. Thank you.
How does it feel to be graduating during the pandemic?
So obviously, I think the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is uncertainty. And the second thing is the fear of job security, right? Because at this stage, we all need a job.
Definitely.
But I think what stood out to me is basically the alumni networks of both the institutes that I've been a part of, ISB and NITK. I think I've seen alums from across years support those impacted by COVID. And I think it's a really positive feeling to feel like I always have these networks to fall back on. So if there's one bit of takeaway that I have from this pandemic, it is that, grow your networks, because that's the one thing that you can always fall back on irrespective of time.
Correct. I've always believed in the power of a network as well. It's been immensely helpful. So, Achuth, you're a candidate of the ISB Youth Leadership Programme. Yes, exactly. Which is a deferred admission option for high potential college students pursuing their bachelor's or master's education, where you're guaranteed admission to their full-time program while you're still in college, as I understand it. What are your thoughts on this mode of admission?
Okay, so first off, I'd just like to say that I am a wild piece, so I'll obviously be biased. But because I have a couple of reasons. First, so once you become a part of the Young Leaders Program, you have 20 months to, engage in work wherever you get placed post your undergrad degree before you start. And in that 2-year period, approximately, you have your YLP weekends, learning sessions, access to professors as well as alums. And I think that helps build an understanding of how the program is going to be and gives you a very good flavor of what you need to succeed there. Whereas those who come in directly after like a 3-month process, they probably don't have that advantage. I think the other aspect is a lot of folks have to spend a lot of time while they're working focusing on getting into an MBA program. Once you have this sorted in your undergrad course, I think that helps you focus on just delivering impact at work, right? You can go all out. And at the end of the day, that makes for a good resume, because even post MBA, you can show that you've done and created impact at work. And lastly, I think you get in early. So it sets the tone for your career, because, you're sort of on a path and, combining that with the fact that you can deliver impact, I think it sets you up for future success easily.
Definitely. I think among all the doors that open for you through YLP, I think getting assimilated into the ISB environment really stands out to me, at least personally. So when students, they decide to pursue an MBA in India, I think many people are confused when they sit down to compare the ISB's 1-year program and the IIM's 2-year program. The huge difference in fees, the difference in duration, and maybe a lack of the IIM brand are contributing factors to this confusion. As an ISB grad, what is your take on this?
Again, disclaimer, I will be biased. But I'll take up first the fact that you pointed out the difference in fees. So if you were to look at that across a 2-year period, right? So you end up paying fees for 1 year at ISB, and then you're earning, let's say, let's take a rough number, right? Whatever, the average has been close to 20 to 22 LPA. So you pay 40. So over a 2-year period, your net is what you pay out in that 1 year minus what you earn in that 1 year that you're working. Whereas in IIMs, you're not working during that time period. So when you compare it across the same time period, it roughly comes out to be the same. So I think that the fee factor for me neutralized there. The second aspect, and I think the single biggest reason why I still prefer an ISB degree over an IIM degree if I had the choice, was diversity. Because I think given that, a lot of the IIM cohort typically go in directly after college or within a year or two of working, that reduces the level of exposure or the discussion that happens in the campus of the cohort. For example, in my batch, class of 20, I had a year and a half of experience. I had a 22 years experience retired army colonel who was my batchmate and sitting next to me. There was an illustrator, right? Like, he used to illustrate, and art was his main occupation. There was a doctor, there was a hospital owner, there was a garment factory owner. And the perspectives that these people bring in, right? Like, I didn't know what GSM was. And there was this lady, Krishna, who told me, who ran the factory. So that's a brilliant experience. And lastly, I think work experience, having that 20 months of work experience definitely teaches you a lot of soft skills, like how to say no, just as how to say yes. How do you put your point across subtly without just saying, you're right, you're wrong, I'm right. So all these things are a lot of soft skills that polish you and again set you up for success in your 1 year at ISB. So I think that's probably the biggest reasons. 1 year versus 2 year, I think we don't miss out on anything at ISB. The curriculum and the number of credits are fairly the same as at IIM.
All right. I think the opportunity cost factor really comes into play here.
Yep.
Okay. So when and how did you conclude that you wanted to pursue an MBA and not any other master's program? Was there anyone or anything in your time at NITK that helped you make that decision?
So there was a club presentation, and it was by IST, if I'm not wrong, in my third year, when an alum who got into ISB via the YLP program came in and spoke about the whole thing. And I had not heard of ISB before. And I was fairly certain from my experience throughout NITK that I was not someone who would want to dig deeper into a technical field. Rather, I'd enjoy moving across horizontally between functions. And so management as a field stood out for me because that's something that enables you to move across horizontally between verticals. So I reached out to the senior, and it also definitely helped that I had a wingmate and a really close friend who wanted to move into management as well. So we both decided to apply together. So I think these two factors mainly. But if you're asking why not any of the other more traditional master's programs that people go to from NITK, simply because I sort of realized from the effort I had to put in to master the whole engineering shebang that I fit in more naturally into a management field kind of role. So yeah.
Definitely. I
Ironic,
can
but
relate
yeah.
to that. So the admission to the YLP, it's a 3-stage process. Can you shed some light on the different stages and maybe share a few tips for each?
Okay, so again, disclaimer here, things might have changed a bit. From what I understand, it's fairly the same. So stage 1 is they ask you for an essay, and I think there, that's really the start. So for the YLP aspect, again, because you don't have a lot of work experience, you don't have a lot of impact, right? You can't tell people how you improved efficiency or reduced cost or increased revenue. So it really has to be your story, and that has to come through in probably from your personal life or from your academic life. So craft your story. I think that's the biggest tip that I can give you. Do not just pick up anything random and just write about it. Second, take help from your peers. I didn't have access to a lot of seniors at that point, so I just mainly ran all of my essays through my peers, and the tips are brilliant. And be honest, because if you do make it to stage 3, right, and most of you all from NITK are good enough to make it there, they will figure it out if you just picked up a story from Quora and like changed your name and Indianified it and just wrote it there, because it stands out very easily. Stage 2 is then I think GMAT as well as 2 more essays. Again, your essays should have a flow. There should be a story. That's why I said craft your story in stage 1. Your first essay should not be about how you found it difficult to do well in academics in school, and your second essay should not be about how you crushed it at an NITK and topped and won the gold medal, right? There's no flow there. That doesn't make sense. So have a logical flow. Your 3 essays should connect well together. For GMAT prep, I personally think 2 to 3 months is more than enough. Again, all of y'all are super smart and like should not take more than 2 to 3 months of 2 or 3 hours per day to make sure you get to a GMAT score that puts you up there, right? Any questions, Suprita, or I'll just move on to stage 3?
Yeah, you can move on to stage 3. Go ahead.
Perfect. So stage 3 is the interview stage. You come in. I've not had the luck to do any interviews yet because I just graduated myself, but I've taken a look at a bunch of essays as part of the admissions committee. And if there's one thing I can tell you, it's very easy to make out, again, people who have added little bits of fluff here and there to their stories. Right? Because from what alums tell me, it really comes through because you're in a lot of stress there and you inevitably slip up. So honesty, I think number 1 for interview. Second, question the alums back. They enjoy some amount of, I would say, fight in a candidate, not someone who just accepts everything they say. And lastly, just prep because there's only so many questions they can ask you. And trust me, it may seem like a lot, but inevitably they end up being, permutations and combinations of the same kind of things from your life. So just prep. I personally put a lot of time into prep and I was brutally honest. I didn't question my interviewers back, but I think the prep really saved and had my back.
Right. Nice. That was really good to hear. Achuth, you mentioned that we need to submit our GMAT score in stage 2. So would you recommend signing up for coaching classes? And if not, how do you suggest one go about with the self-study approach?
This, I would say, is an extremely individual choice. But if I had to give you a framework for how you would go about this, I would say take a week or two, reach out to me or just Google what are the most common GMAT books. You'll get a bunch of resources. Prep for a week or two and take a sample test. You get 2 free sample tests from the official GMAT test givers, right? Take one of them, figure out where you lie. There's no number set in stone, but I would say if you want to be fairly certain that GMAT is not going to be a bottleneck for your application, I think a number north of 700 should do well. 700 or 720 is a good number to aim for.
Makes sense.
Not saying that you won't make it in if you get a 680, but 720 plus means GMAT is not going to be your issue. Other things maybe, right?
Okay.
So if you are like say a 680 or 650 or a 630, I think you can, if you put in, if you conscientiously work 3 hours a day for two months, I think you can make up those 100 points. Otherwise, if you feel like you need a lot more structure and someone to help you out, I think that's when you need to think about these classes. But again, I personally think that all of you are smart enough if you can put in the time every day to make it to that 700 plus number.
The dedication is the key because everyone,
Yep.
at least in NITK, is capable enough to do the GMAT well.
Yep.
I'm sure many aspirants are worried if their CGPA at NITK will hurt their chances at an admit. So what are your thoughts on this? Do you think an above average GMAT score will help compensate for a lower CGPA, and up to which semester will the CGPA be considered?
When I applied, I had given my CGPA up to 6th sem. With respect to does undergrad CGPA matter? Personally, my opinion is GPA matters, but I think what's more important is the brand. And you already come from a really good brand, right? NITK. So as far as GPA goes, I think what's more important is your explanation. You can't have a really low GPA and not have an explanation for what got you there. What basically they're trying to see is, do you realize what went wrong? Are you the sort of person that goes back, analyzes and understands, this is where I need to course correct? And if you can provide them that plan, and then if you can show them some level of proof of the fact that you've implemented that plan, that's brilliant, right? Like that's awesome. But even if you don't have some sort of proof, if you can tell them, bullet point 1, 2, 3, this is where I made a mistake. Bullet point 1, 2, 3, this is how I'm trying to correct it. That's also good enough. But have an explanation for the GPA that you have. And this is true whether you have a really great GPA or not. Because if you have a really great GPA, why? Like, why is that important to you? Why did you give up on maybe a Toastmasters role or an ESL role to put in that much time to study? So why is that important? That they want to know. So it's not just like, like if you have a really good GPA, you're good to go. No, they want to know why. If it helps anybody who's listening to this, I didn't have a really great GPA when I applied, and that didn't matter because I was able to give them an explanation of why, and I was able to show, it was in an upward trend. So yeah, that's all they're looking for. It doesn't matter. It's not a do or die kind of situation where if you don't have a GPA above a certain cutoff, you're not going to get an admit. Definitely not the case.
Right. That was very assuring. Achuth, you mentioned regarding the essays that we need to submit in stage 1 and 2, and the interviews that we will be needing to face during stage 3. So I wanted to ask you whether it's a good idea to enlist the help of admission consultants. There are these companies that offer these services for interview preparation and for the essays.
Sure. So, Suprita, I think that's again a very individual choice. But if I had to give you a framework, it would be see if you can get access to an alum, and if that alum is willing to be disturbed on a weekly basis. If that's the case, perfect. And then second aspect is see if you have the time to do the research, because personally, I didn't take the help of any admissions consultant, but I spent probably an equal amount of time that I would have sitting down with them on Quora, because Quora was my single biggest source of ISB information, because you have a lot of first-hand accounts from people themselves. I would say Reddit is a really good source now. Reddit r/MBA has a lot of good ISB info. And just Google. You have a lot of these consultants themselves putting out blog posts, and I collated a lot of information that way. Once I had that information set from my end, I then reached out to a lot the NITK senior as well as a couple of people outside of NITK who had gotten through the YLP program into the YLP, and I was able to understand how the interview process and the essays and what they were kind of looking for. Now, if that's not something that you want to do or you have the time to do, or if that overwhelms you, by all means go for it. They definitely will not mess up your application for sure.
So one of the most intimidating questions, why an MBA? When you were asked by the interview panel, how did you answer this question?
Okay, so do keep in mind that I was a third year engineering student with zero work experience to speak of, just a 2-month internship. So they don't expect a lot. So don't bite off your own boots by going overboard talking about strategy and startups and bootstrapping and all of that. So they realize that you just know a bunch of keywords and you have zero work experience to boot, right? So just don't do that. Like, that's just shooting yourself in the head. Rather, what I told them was, listen, in engineering, what I'm particularly learning is how to apply technical concepts after I know what the problem is mostly, and I am fairly aware of all the environmental variables. But what I realized personally was that I'm not really good at handling scenarios when the problem itself has to be designed. Like, the environmental variables are yours to choose. It's not just electricity that I'm dealing with as a triple engineer. It's just pick whatever you want, right? And that sort of overwhelmed me. So I told them that's the kind of education that I want to get from an MBA across multiple functions, so that when a canvas is given to me, I know what to pick from the entire toolset that I have and use them correctly so that there is an actual result that can be shown, rather than just applying a lot of concepts that I've learned into a very set environment, which is what I would say. Okay, so I might get some flack for saying this, but at least the way I approached engineering was like that. Second was, in my internship, I had the opportunity to interact with an individual called Pankaj Rai. He's an SVP of strategy at Wells Fargo. And I had some interesting conversations with him, which I quoted. And I said, given that I want to understand how to handle ambiguity and how to structure problems, strategy seemed like the sort of challenge that I would really enjoy, given that directly tests my ability to just consume a lot of data and provide a path forward for the organization that I'd be working for. So I put these 2 points across and they bought it because I believed in it. I still do. And yeah, So I think just find something that you genuinely believe in, and it just comes across, man. It can be the simplest of things, but it comes across. Instead, I'm pretty certain if I'd gone and told them I want to make investor pitch decks and learn how to bootstrap and raise money and scale my organization, they would have called me out on what I was saying. So yeah.
Definitely. I think as long as you find something that works for you and sounds genuine and you put that forth, should be fine.
Exactly.
If it comes from within you, then it becomes very apparent.
Very
If one
philosophical
is, yeah.
answer to a very business question, but it holds true.
If one is successful and gets the YLP offer, would you recommend they apply to foreign MBA and MIM programs with their GMAT score?
Again, personal choice, but I have a framework for y'all. If you want to make a real quick comparison, first is, do you want to stay in India versus do you want to work abroad? That is the single biggest factor that determines this. I personally strongly believe that India is going to be the booming area in the next 20 years. So I personally made a choice that I want to work here, and it didn't make sense for me to go and pay all of that extra money to get an MBA from outside only to come back to India, because the brand value is fairly the same in India, right? Second, look at diversity of the cohort. Are you going into an MIM program which is comprised mostly of engineers or people from a certain area? Because some schools tend to have a very strong bias towards a certain kind of field. Like, for example, your ISB is known as a consulting school and a product management school, right? Like a lot of people come in there to move into consulting or product management, not really finance. Whereas FMS is obviously, known for their finance practice. So look at that. Cost, obviously, if the two things fall, then India turns out to be a lot more cheaper than going abroad. And if at the end of the day, for your goals, India works out well, then it doesn't really make sense to go outside and pay all of that extra money. And brand value, again, like I said, certain schools are well known for certain things. MICA for marketing may not help you get into consulting versus ISB, which is like opens a lot of doors in consulting. Versus any of the other IIMs. Some of them are known for your leadership programs in FMCG firms versus consulting versus finance versus private equity. So that's your choice.
Right. I think it's more about what they want to do post an MBA and targeting a school that works with that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the official ISB website mentions that you can apply for the YLP during your pre-final or your final year. Does applying in a particular year carry any advantage as such?
I personally don't think so. That has nothing to do with your application, because even in your final year, you would just have started work, so you won't have any work experience or any impact that you would have created in like 3 months of work, right?
Right.
So for all purposes, I think there's no delta and advantage between the 2 years. The only difference is you can be a lot more relaxed in your final year if you've got a job in hand and an MBA application to boot. So, you can go crazy in final year.
Yeah, definitely. If one applies for the YLP in their third year, isn't successful in cracking it, and isn't particular about ISB or IIM as such, do you recommend that they try again in their final year or focus on preparing for CAT and the IIMs?
Okay, so this, I will quote a point of view that my manager in my internship at Wells Fargo told me. He was an FMS graduate from 1990s. And he told me, get work experience, because that is something that he did, and it made him stand out with respect to folks that came in without any work experience. The delta might be small, but I spoke about soft skills in, it smoothens out your rough edges. You learn how to say no in a very nice way. You learn how to step on people's toes without actually eliciting a response from them, so they get what your point was. So all of these softer skills are very valuable in an MBA program.
And I would say get work experience for sure. At least a year of work experience makes a world of difference, because you can understand what a lot of these courses are talking about rather than just imagining them as
and knowing
concepts.
The words.
Yeah, just knowing the words. Now you know, right? When an OB professor comes and says the reason why 360-degree evaluation is put in place is because otherwise the bell curve negatively affects you. You don't know what that negative effect is unless you've actually not been given a promotion because you are not in the right side of the curve, right? So a lot of these things fall into better perspective if you do work experience. So personally, I advise every single person work for 2 years, hands down, and then think about an MBA. Makes your education so much more valuable. And then again, if you had to ask me IIM versus ISB, I would say ISB again because of all the reasons that I cited in the earlier question about ISB versus IIM, diversity being the single biggest reason.
So, if you receive an offer for the YLP, you're expected to finish at least 20 months of work experience after graduation, like you just mentioned. So, post which you can join the regular PGP class at ISB. How many months of work experience do you recommend completing before joining campus? I think you mentioned 1 to 2 years, but ideally, how many months would you say is a good, amount of time? And is more work experience any more advantages in any way post ISB?
Okay. Thanks for this question, Sukrita. So, the minimum 20 months of work ex requirement, I think if you are a typical YLP candidate, you barely meet that. Like, I had 21 months of work experience. So, all of the time that you have between ending your undergrad and starting work and joining ISB, if you don't defer your admit as a YLP, you just have hardly 22 months there. So there's not a lot of option to extend it as a typical YLP candidate. What a lot of people do is they defer your admit by a year so that they get maybe like 27 or 28 months in. And that's only because they already know what field they want to get into post MBA and they're already in that field. And in that case, additional experience really boosts your profile. Because let me put a scenario to you, right? I'm in analytics and I want to go into Amex as a manager in their analytics division or credit analytics division post MBA. So in that case, having additional 1 year of experience in analytics definitely boosts my profile. They'll pick me over some other guy who doesn't have analytics experience, right? But like me, if you're someone who was in one industry and wanted to switch into another industry, low workex helps because with 20 months of workex, you're really not stuck to any industry. You're industry agnostic, right? Just because I've done 20 months of work experience in analytics does not mean that I'm an analytics guy or an analytics guru. Whereas if you have like 5 years of work experience in analytics, you've already deep into analytics territory. There's no easy way of going back, right? You've been molded by that industry. So the lesser workex opens up a lot more opportunities where as a YLP, I could have gone into marketing or finance or consulting or even product management. But the more workex helps if you already are in the industry that you know you want to head to post MBA.
Okay. So just a follow-up question to that. Won't more work experience, make you more financially stable to be able to afford your MBA at ISB? If that's the case for a few people.
Not say that.
Okay.
See, so I would assume, given I'm sure you're aware of what the ISB fee is at this point in
38,
time. You would have to,
yeah,
36. So you would have to have an insane CC right out of your undergrad to have enough saved up for that. I think it makes a lot more sense to lose out 1 year when your earning potential is a lot less than work for 5 years and then lose out 1 year where you could be earning a potential CTC of 20 lakhs, right?
Right.
So overall, I guess, and the second aspect is you will have to take a loan unless, like I said, you're one of those crazy people with like 70 lakh CTC and you're saving like 30, right?
Yeah.
Which I think for the average NITK is not the case.
Not the case. Definitely not the case.
Yeah. So in that case, you'll have to end up taking a loan anyway. So then it makes sense to take a loan as early as possible so that you finish paying off that loan at a much younger age, right? Like if you take up a loan at 25, then you pay that off by 30, right? So that's a burden off your shoulders before you're very old.
Correct.
And the 1 year that you lost is probably worth 10 or 12 or 15, LPA versus probably a potential high-paying salary year. So I think for these two reasons, the financial independence aspect of it doesn't really come into the picture here. It's more about, are you in the industry that you want to head to post MBA?
Got it. So since your mode of admission was different from the majority of your classmates, who would have probably, entered through the normal mode. Did YLP affect your placement in ISB?
I'll give you two pictures here. The first is what I already spoke about. I have very low years of work ex, so I'm really industry agnostic and not molded by a firm, which I was in the banking industry, and I was in the analytics function. So I'm not really molded by how the banking industry works or how analytics folks do work. So I have access to like marketing, financial roles, risk roles, uh, you know, consulting, product management, and the entire spectrum, and that's great. But what happens is, imagine your McKinsey or a Bain or a BCG comes in, and they want to hire someone with experience in the government, right? And with my years of work experience versus a guy who's worked for 6 years in the home ministry, they're going to prefer somebody with that experience. So when it comes to niche fields, like when somebody's looking for an actuary, they would prefer somebody with 5 years of risk experience versus a YLP candidate whom they'll have to train. So in those specific cases, you may lose out to someone with a greater experience. Sorry, but otherwise, I think I personally, in my experience, given that I wanted to switch industries, I loved the entire spectrum of roles that were open to me as a YLP. Simply because firms realized that they can pick me and they can mold me. Exact same reason why after having completed an electrical engineering degree from NITK, Wells Fargo picked me up for an analytics role, right, without any past experience, because they realized they can mold me.
According to their needs and however they see you fit.
Right. So overall, I would say being a YLP just opens up the sort of roles that you can go to, and that's great. Because post MBA, you really want to go in not knowing what to do and have like a whole bunch of options wherein you could be in Procter and Gamble in their marketing division, or you could be in McKinsey doing consulting, or you could be in like Blackstone doing private equity work, right? So that's a brilliant range of options to have.
And with that, we come to an end of today's episode. You can visit www.isb.edu/young-leaders-program for more information on the ISB YLP. Thank you, Achuth, for your insights on the ISB YLP and for taking out the time to make this happen. I'm sure a lot of aspiring students from NITK will find this super useful.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great being able to discuss ISB and what an MBA can add to someone's career. If any of you all have any queries or doubts, look me up on LinkedIn and just shoot me a message, just like Suprita did, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about ISB and the MBA and YLP and all of that. But thank you, guys.
I would also like to thank our listeners. I hope you took away something very valuable from today's episode of the ABCs of applying to a B school. Until next time, stay home, stay safe, and stay strong.